Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope everyone's doing great this week, and if I sound a little different, it's because I seem to have a bit of a stuffy nose. It is that time of year after all. In this video, it's going to be all about the Ozarks and the strange things that lurk within. If that sounds like something you like, then definitely pull up a stump with me. And I think some of these stories, I don't know, like, some of them sound familiar to me, but I don't know if I've told them before, so we're gonna find out. But yeah, let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So this is not particularly scary, but it's the only remotely paranormal thing that I've ever experienced, and it tripped me out for a while when it happened. So it was Thanksgiving 2019. I was driving to my aunt's place in the Ozarks in southern Missouri. It was a gray and rainy day, the entire day, so there was no break in the clouds at all, and it's been raining the entire 6-hour drive. So I'm a few miles outside of Branson West. The nearest gas station is like 10 minutes away, and I have to pee like a racehorse. I pull off on the side of the road to pee. Now, the small town cops around here are dickheads, and I didn't want to risk getting slapped with an indecent exposure charge if they saw me peeing right off the side of the road. So I walk about 50 yards into the woods. I look back every 10 steps to see if I can still see my truck. It opens up to a small clearing, maybe 10 feet across, but I notice that I don't smell the rain anymore. The ground I'm standing on is dry. I look up. There's not a single cloud in the sky. I'm freaking out because nothing out here should be dry when it's been raining non-stop for 2 days. I turn around and book it back to my truck. When I get back, the sky is gray and everything is wet again. I just risk it and I pee on the side of the road and don't go back into the woods. The rest of the day and Thanksgiving passed without incident. I don't know what the hell happened there. So I was traveling through the South a couple decades ago. I worked as a contract operator. I was hiking in the mountains of the Ozarks, and I came upon a light-skinned native girl who was about 20 at the time. We made conversation on the ridge overlooking the valley as the sun was setting. I was distracted and figured I would have to work tomorrow instead now, since I didn't get anything done that day. She said that she lived close by and I could come over to stay the night. I agreed. We hung out all night, and as we got talking, one thing led to another and we ended up having sex for a good few hours. But after we were done, she said that, just an FYI, this house is haunted. I kinda laughed it off, but she reaffirmed that she said it was like a poltergeist. She said it mainly stays in the kitchen. I didn't think any more of it, and I went to bed. In the night, though, I woke up to banging pots, banging pans, cabinet drawers opening and closing. Things were stacking themselves, and the vibe was eerie, static-like. I tried to wake her up, but I couldn't. She wouldn't budge. It must have sensed me, because it was soon at the door, moving the door, creaking it back and forth, shaking the doorknob. I pretended to sleep, but it knew better, and then I heard something come in, slowly. It started at my feet, and it pressed down until I could sense it in my face. I was still pretending to sleep at this point. Then, it eventually left and went back to the kitchen. After a few hours, I calmed down enough that I could sleep. I woke up in the morning, and we had breakfast, and I left to go back to my work. I was back to where I met her, and life carried on. I never forgot about it. I still have PTSD from the things that happened that night, and years later, I'm not even 100% sure that she was real, and that maybe I could have passed out in an abandoned house and got possessed in the middle of nowhere while doing my operation. Anyways, one will never know. but it's very vivid to this day that something was really wrong about the way everything happened that night. Two years ago, I was out in the Ozarks hunting on Army Corps land near a park. I was sitting against a tree and I was waiting while looking down this lane in the woods that went toward a valley. I was turkey hunting, so I had my shotgun and I wasn't wearing orange. I laid some camo burlap over my legs, and after seeing 3 deer pass by and hearing a hen cluck, I decided to stay put a little later than I normally would. And I wait for quite a while, but by this point it's getting toward dark, or the game and fish would consider low light, so I get ready to pack up. And I hear this loud snap, and I pause to listen, and I can't hear anything. I tilt my head to see around to the left of me, and also behind me, where I heard the noise, and I see this big black outline lumbering through the woods in my peripheral vision toward the opposite of where I initially heard the noise. I get a little startled, and I whip my head toward the shape, and I notice that it looks like a bear would, but it's running like a big cat. And upon seeing that, I think, well, I guess it's time to go. I get up, and I throw my burlap over my shoulder like a scarf instead of packing it away, and I start to walk at a moderate pace toward the edge of the woods. I still had a good 40-minute walk ahead of me. I see it again at the corner of my vision. This time, it was facing me, but it had snuck around to the left again, and I realized that it was making circles around me, following me at a distance. I turn and pull the camo mesh off my face. I scream at it. I hold my shotgun over my head to look bigger. It doesn't leave like a native black bear would. Instead, it lets out a deep growl, or something akin to that, and it begins swinging wide again. I decide to keep up a decent pace, but I don't want to run, so I don't tire myself out or make whatever this is kick into hunting mode. I finally see a clearing, and I think, okay, I only have 30 more minutes of walking ahead of me. But then a strange sensation began to take a hold of me. I felt seasick. My ears filled with the rhythmic thumping of my pulse, even though I hadn't exerted myself, and I got this brief shot of dread that filled my body. I turn back around and I start heading for the wood line that leads toward the exit, when I see it nestled among the trees, squatting, almost trying to hide, and I think, screw this. I was about 60 yards away, and I blasted 3 rapid-fire birdshot blasts, aiming at its face. It didn't growl, or even roar. Instead, it made this guttural groan, and I swear to God I could hear it yell, "Ow," like a man would if he stubbed his toe and broke it. At this point, I'd had enough, and I doubled back toward where I was initially hunting. I sprinted this time, and I caught the burlap around my neck on a branch that caused me to essentially clothesline myself to the ground. Scrambling, I remember hearing the thundering of its footsteps behind me, but I couldn't see it. I used the last 2 shots in my tube, and the first flash of the gunshots, I could see its face. It wasn't like a bear or a cat in the face. It looked like a weird kind of canine type thing. I don't know if I hit it or if I missed it, but I kept running, and because it was now almost pitch black, I began to quickly lose my place and footing. I slapped 3 shells into my gun, the last ones I had. Then, I don't remember a whole lot. I have faint memories of staring at the stars, and then the sunrise. I was found 10 hours later, down in the bottom of the valley, essentially unconscious. I got treated for rib fractures. I needed stitches for a few cuts on my arm, and I was questioned by the local law enforcement. My shotgun was found busted into pieces, like somebody had slapped it over a boulder. That's an actual quote from the law enforcement. The backpack I was wearing was smashed flat, like somebody had pinched the sides extremely hard, and it was found at the top of the valley with one of the shoulder straps completely detached on both sides. The cops didn't really know what to make of it and ruled it off as me getting lost and falling. I never told really anybody what I saw, and I've never gone back to those woods, but I still get made fun of by my family for falling while hunting. I know it all sounds kind of campy and dumb, but I'm honest to God terrified of what I saw. After growing up and living in the woods, I still cannot tell you today what the hell I saw. So here's the story that my uncle will only talk about whenever he's really drunk. It was the mid-90s, and he was in the Ozarks of Arkansas. He was going on a solo camping trip in the late summer, and he brought his new SKS. So he packed up his stuff, he got in his truck, and he went to the woods. He was driving to a camping spot that he knew about in the St. Francis National Forest. So he unpacked his stuff off the truck and he headed off into the woods. As he walks, the amount of light is entering early twilight. He gets to a spot that he likes, he sets up base camp, a tent, a fire, the whole shebang. He pulls out his SKS and loads it, and chambers around, in case anything decides it wants to sneak around his campsite. He sits around the fire for a few hours, just reading a book and eating beans. Now, it's dark. As he eats his food, he starts hearing less and less sounds in the woods. It's not like one of those situations where everything stops. It just kinda slow. Like first the cicadas stop, then after a while, he can't hear the frogs anymore, and then the crickets, and then everything else. He notices, but he doesn't think too much of it. This happens normally, all the time, depending if there's a predator around. After a couple more hours, he decides it's time for bed. Before he goes in to sleep, though, he goes and gets a bunch more wood to pile on the fire to keep it going. He heads a couple yards outside of the light of the fire, and while picking up logs and sticks, a faint stink is picked up by his schnoz. My uncle takes a mental note and heads back. He throws the wood on the fire, and he settles into the tent with his gun. He's asleep for maybe a couple hours. He awakes due to a repugnant smell. His brain turns on, and he immediately thinks that it's a big bear that's outside of his tent. For those that don't know, there are hybrid black-brown bears in the Ozarks. They smell terrible, and they're super stupid, but they're dangerous because of their size and aggressiveness. My uncle grabs his gun instinctively. He hears walking around the border of his camp. The footsteps are walking in a spiral, getting closer and closer into camp. The smell is unbearable at this point. Something finally walks into the camp and starts rummaging around his pack for food. He's debating on what to do. Either shoot the bear and get arrested for poaching, or just fire near it to scare it away. He takes the second option, and he sticks the barrel through the tent opening. He sees the ass end of what he thought was a big bear. He aims the gun out the side of the bear and pulls the trigger. The bear stops rummaging. My uncle always said that it was just like a movie. The quote bear turned super slowly and stared at him. It turns fully, and it hits my uncle. This is not a bear. It turns and he sees human-like hands holding a bag of chips. The creature's body was vaguely humanoid, but covered in thick, matted brown, blackish hair. The face was long and had a bullet-shaped head, and its eyes were deeply sunk into its skull. Its nose looked like a troll nose, hanging down with huge nostrils, It had blocky teeth and a strange look on its face. The weird bear-human hybrid thing stood from all fours and stared at my uncle. My uncle kind of stares back at it, almost in a trance. He snaps out of it and fires a shot, center mass. Dust and grime puffs off the thing's chest from the round hitting it. The creature winces and makes a pained roar. It coughs up blood and then gets back on all fours and runs off, exactly like a bear, from my uncle's camp. He reloads and steps out of the tent, and he's looking side to side to see if it's still there or if there's more of them. He slings the gun and he starts shoving the stuff back into his rucksack. He finishes repacking and just stomps the fire out. And during the situation, he's not thinking straight and is afraid, and he ends up catching his pant leg on fire. Once he puts it out, he starts heading off in the direction that his truck was in. While he jogs/walks back, he keeps seeing something in the corner of his eyes, and he hears movement all around him. He's halfway as he is coming by a bend in a trail. A huge rock lands right in front of him. He looks at it, and then another rock lands behind him. He's standing there, and more rocks come out of the trees, whizzing over his head from his 9 o'clock. He unslings his SKS and mag dumps. After this, he just takes off. He runs all the way back to his truck. While he runs, he keeps hearing multiple things running around. He gets into his truck and speeds off. He gets back and just drinks to forget it. He's only told me this story, like I said, when mega drunk. Whenever I ask about it when he's sober, he says, "Don't talk about that." So yeah, that's my uncle's Ozark Bigfoot encounter. I live in the Ozarks, and I got trapped in a screwed up cave one time. The story follows. So this was when I was about 10-ish. My mom and my sister and I used to go hiking a lot. There's a relatively accessible cave network a few miles south of us. There's lots of different caves, from big open ones to ones that are essentially crawl spaces or wormholes, where you have to army crawl and exhale to make yourself smaller. As a brief aside, if you're the kind of insane person that goes through wormholes and squeezes, you should thank God every single time that you step out of a cave. I'd never even go near that shit, let alone any cave after what we went through. Anyways, I can't remember the name of this specific cave. The entrance has a rock propped up against a wall nearby. I guess it's to keep the black bears and snakes and shit out overnight. We have our Shih Tzu, Lucy, with us. Mom doesn't want to carry her ass, so she ties her leash to a stand outside the cave. A couple of spelunkers are leaving the cave as we're going in, and they chat with my mom. They tell her that this isn't really a beginner cave, and you and your kids will have an easier time just hiking. My mom says screw that, we came to a cave network to go into caves. And they think, well, suit yourself. So we get into the cave and we turn our lights on. And wow, it's made of rock and it's wet. I spend the whole time looking for cave paintings and dinosaur bones because I was a kid and stupid. My sister is always screwing with me, trying to convince me that there's a bear in there who hasn't eaten and stuff like that. And I think, man, bears are cool, leave them out of this. Maybe 10 minutes go by, and we're a few chambers in. The only way to go any further is in a squeeze. It's about 9 inches tall. It's pretty wide. The sheet of rock above it has a crack separating it from the main cave, but there are some metal supports or something. It's hard to remember now. It looks like it was designed to crush people, so I didn't want anything to do with that. My sister starts freaking out, saying she heard something. I was pretty sure that I heard it too, but I assumed it was her trying to screw with me again. I say to her, "You're stupid. I'm not falling for it." My mom tells us both to shut up and be quiet. We're in silence for a little bit, and we hear something coming from deeper in the cave. I can't make it out, but my sister and I flip our shit. My mom says it's probably just the wind at the other end of the cave. We decide it's time to leave because we can't go any further. We start heading back out. It's pretty easy. There's a couple of spots that you have to climb up and drop down, but nothing that requires any real athleticism. We get to where the entrance should be. The rock has fallen over it, or it was pushed. Either way, we're sealed in, and Mom tries pushing the rock, but she's too short to have any real leverage. We try yelling, but not even Lucy is barking, and she's tied pretty close to the entrance. Batteries on flashlights are getting low, but Mom packs spares. She says we shouldn't use them yet unless we really need them. We wait around for a little while, yelling sometimes, trying different ways of pushing the rock. Mom decides that it's time to try heading for the other end of the cave. We make our way there. We're trying to use the flashlight only when necessary. Mom ends up falling down a 3 or 4 foot drop, and I fall with her. It wasn't too bad. We landed on our feet, but it was still scary. We make it back to the squeeze. Mom's kind of overweight and can't fit. I am too young to be trusted to find my way through. She tells my sister to get to the other end of the cave and find somebody who can lift the rock. My sister's 13 and she's freaking out, but she's a champ. She takes the flashlight and makes her way in. My mom and sister are talking to each other through the squeeze. They're figuring the whole thing out, I guess. Eventually, my sister stops replying. Mom is hysterical, trying to call her, but not trying to be so loud because a collapse could happen or something. Eventually, she's quiet, listening for a response. I think she's crying too. And then, we hear rocks moving from the other end of the chamber. There's people calling, "Anyone in there?" And we see flashlights, and we think, thank God we're saved. The same cavers who we met on the way were leaving for the day, and they noticed that our dog was still tied up, and the rock was over the entrance, and they put 2 and 2 together. My mom explains that my sister is looking for the other end of the cave. The dude pushes past us immediately and climbs through the squeeze. We watch his feet disappear, and his buddy explains that this cave doesn't have another end. It's about 1.5 miles long, and there are a lot of really tight, interconnected tunnels. It's basically a maze past the squeeze, and most of it hasn't even been explored. Mom loses it and starts yelling to the guy who went in after my sister. The guy that's with us grabs her and tells her to stop, that she's going to cause a collapse, and we just have to wait. I don't remember a lot of the waiting. Mom and this guy talk for a little while, and he tells us stories about the other caves and all the crazy shit that he and his friend do. He seems like a really cool guy, honestly. Eventually, we hear voices from the other side. My sister's crawling toward us. The dude is crawling behind her. He's telling her it's going to be okay. We're almost there. She meets us, and my mom rips her out of the crack and squeezes her, all while saying, "I'm here, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The dude comes out shortly after and says that my sister was unconscious and that she must have hit her head. My sister isn't talking. She's just staring at the flashlight. We make our way out of the cave. The dog is happy to see us. My mom makes a joke about Encino Man, which I'm way too young to get at the time. My sister is covered in scratches and has a gnarly bruise on her arm. On the drive to the urgent care, my sister whispers that she didn't hit her head. She leans in really close and says, "It grabbed me." I try to get her to explain, and she won't. The nurse says that there aren't any obvious signs of a concussion, and she can't find any bumps on her head. They just treat it like a concussion anyways, and keep an eye on her. For anyone mad that it's a long story and not much happens, I'm sorry. I figured that this is better than family of 3 found dead in local cave system. At least, for me it is. It took my sister 3 months to start talking, and even with therapy, which I don't really think made a whole lot of a difference to her, and to this day, she still won't talk to me or anybody else about it. I've tried talking to my mom about it, and she just acts like it was that crazy time that we got trapped in a cave, and even said that she would try going spelunking again someday, just her and my stepdad. And I'm thinking, have fun, I'm not doing it. So this happened when I was 23, back in 2014. I was doing one of the stalker challenges in a woods. This was in Arkansas in the Ozarks. I was with some new gear that I had been saving for months. I had new boots, a tack vest, I even had a military surplus gas mask. It was like Christmas for me. Being where I was, and wanting to field test some personal prototypes, I had my Nagant on hand. Wouldn't do much against big bears, but it would ruin any snake, or stray dog, or cougar's day right to hell. I had a couple strippers and 2, I call them clipazines, that I built, and I wanted to field test these. They were in my pouches. I also had some rolled up targets stuck in my loops, and a light complement of survival gear. I had a compass, topographic map, thermal blanket, spare underwear, extra ammo, MREs, a canteen, and a camelback. Along with those, I had amphetamines, bug spray, rope, spikes, a mallet, an e-tool, shower powder, baby powder, toilet paper, and the works. As you can imagine, I was quite well prepared. And I've done nothing heretical to my Nagant if you're a gun person. I swear these clipazines are what I call jerry-rigged magazines that I custom built from old cannibalized magazines in sheet metal. They fit right into the Nugget's feed if you pull up the floor plate. I've also done some Heinlein-esque mods to my gas mask, an airtight, at least now, water feed, but I digress. Basically, I was out there practicing for the inevitable collapse of civilization and when everybody turns on each other and we all have to survive. So essentially, I was having a blast, romping through the woods, playing with my field of view in the mask, testing the reliability of my clipazines, and just generally having a very good time out in the deep woods. So as I was romping around, I wandered next to a creek bed, and I decided that it was time to practice my guerrilla tactics. It was late summer, early fall, so there was no danger of getting my gear wet in the non-existent stream. There was more of a danger of the water damage from my sweat than anything. After triple checking my safety, I proceeded to do a series of scree slides and uphill hustles in full survival gear. Needless to say, I got winded really fast. So there I stood, panting in the middle of that dry stream bed, and I decided to check my position with my topographic map and compass so I could set a course for home. In the middle of orienteering myself, I caught wind of a smell, and no, it wasn't anything like blood and copper. At first I assumed it was just sweat and body odor, but the funk quickly evolved into something much worse. It had a dark undercurrent of rot, deep notes of animal musk, a bassy score of raw garbage punctuated by garlicky timpani, and a thick black score of something in between skunk and rotting onion sludge. Basically, a symphony of stench, and the conductor decided to skip the adagio and drive the opening movement straight into the scherzo, because that shit was getting stronger. I went into straight operator mode. I popped an addy from my pouch for extra focus. I took out the homemade clipazine from my Nagant. It was working fine, but if I was gonna have to actually face off with something, I'd prefer to not have any risk of it jamming. I gagged at the smell and nearly puked that Addy tab back up. The smell was that strong at this point. Whatever the source was, it was definitely mobile and getting closer. Screw it. I pulled my mask up from around my neck and I pulled it around my face. It helped slightly, but at the time, my dumbass waterline wasn't 100% airtight around the joint. I walked cautiously and slowly along the creek bed to where the slope was the shallowest. I was listening for any twig snaps or animal sounds from above. I definitely heard something shuffling around up there, and it sounded bigger than what my Nagant was up for. It was a near constant snuffle grunt and sloppy, uncoordinated crunching around bark and leaves. That, mixed with the smell, my mind immediately jumped to big bear, a rabid big bear. Now, let me tell you about Ozark big bears, straight from my dad's mouth. Dad's lived in the Ozarks for 58 years, and in that time, only two things have managed to shake him: the challenges of fatherhood and the big bears. According to him, the native black bears were hunted to near extinction between the 40s and 50s. To correct this, the ANRC, NRCS, and Arkansas Fish and Game Commission released 250 bears into the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains. Their website insists that they were all black bears. My dad insists that that's bullshit. According to him, more than a few of the bears released into the Ozarks have been brown bears, and that they interbred with the few remaining locals and the reintroduced black bears. Thanks to a little phenomenon known as hybrid vigor, the resulting offspring were bigger and meaner than their parents, and also fertile. When I asked him to prove it, he simply left the summer porch, went upstairs, and came back with the manila folder labeled BB. He pulled out a couple of Polaroids and asked me to take a look. What I saw was a big and brown something rooting around behind a clothesline. My dad directed my attention to the clothesline about 50 feet away from us, strung between two poles, at about 5'6" off the ground. The same clothesline in the picture. That something's shoulder was about a fart's length underneath the clothesline, despite it being in the background. I looked through the other pictures. One of them was rooting in the trash, another one was barely concealed by trees. All of them were slightly shaky, and so detail was hard to come by, but I was convinced. My dad told me two things that would have to avoid getting my shit shredded by big bears. One, big bears are stupid as shit. It's something to do with them being hybrids. This makes them more dangerous than other bears because they're not afraid of you. It also makes them smell like shit. And if you smell them coming from a mile off, you should just hide. Get inside, get upstairs, and lock the doors and take the shotgun with you, and bring some deer slugs. And two, if you do see a big bear, and you're not at home, and you don't have a shotgun loaded with slugs, hide up a tree. They're faster than you. Running won't do you any good. And the reason why I tell you all this is because after 23 years, I'd finally managed to prove my dad wrong about something. Well, half wrong. There's something in the Ozarks that matched my dad's pictures of big bears, but whatever they aren't bears. So back to the woods. I would have stayed in that creek bed and waited for the something to screw off on its business, but the light was already slanting through the trees, and as bad as my dad made big bears sound, I sure as tits didn't want to be stuck with a goddamn rabid one, especially after dark. I instead opted to climb the opposite edge of the creek bed. I had to scramble over some big rock outcroppings, and I half stand, half leaned against the slope of a hill. But I figured if anything, that would be one more layer of protection against this something. I had gotten a few glimpses of the something over my shoulder as I climbed, but this was my first good look at it. I just stared. Like I said previously, this wasn't a bear. It was bear-like, but not a bear. Now I've been into sci-fi my whole life. Cue the Heinlein-esque mods to my gas mask. And I even got Barlow's Guide to Extraterrestrials from my awesome late stepmom. So when I saw the something for the first time, my nerd brain immediately went, oh, it's a Sulador. Except it wasn't. It looked like a Sulador, a grizzly bear, and a sloth had a three-way on top of a garbage heap to make whatever this was. It had a long prognathous snout like a stubby trunk, big, angular shoulders, feet that looked like manhole covers covered in dirty matted fur, and a body like a blimp. Its fur was the same charcoal black, day-glow brown that I saw in the pictures. It was full of mats and clumps of dirt. I mean, I just stared at it, drinking in the details, trying to make sense of what it was I was looking at for a solid 2.5 minutes, and it somehow hadn't noticed me. These things were indeed pretty dumb. I remember feeling a twinge of relief. If it hadn't noticed me trying to scrabble out of a rocky gully, it probably wouldn't notice me sneaking away. But then, I farted. The something stopped. My breath stopped. My heart stopped. The only sound in those woods was my fart echoing and the sound of my nose blistering under the something's odoriferous assault. Like slow-mo, the thing turned its head, looked back at me, sniffed the air, and stood up. It had been shuffling around, crouched low to the ground the entire time. What I had thought were shoulder blades were its elbows. It could tie its shoes without bending down, but its paws probably would have crushed its Air Jordans to bits, like they were trash can lids. It sniffed the air, and coughed, barked like it was asking me a question. Gorp. I swear on my mother, that's what it sounded like. Gorp. So, being me, the dumbass who doesn't listen to his dad, and being the awkward guy who farts when he's trying to sneak away from a goddamn gorp, I aimed for the center of mass. I fired. The bullet didn't thwack into the gorp because, hey, if you're gonna die, you may as well give your killer a stupid name in your head, right? As much as it thwumped. There was a puff of dirt and hair when it made the noise, and, bless my luck, the thing flinched from the impact. I waited for blood. I guess that they're so covered in nasty flea-ridden hair mats that over time the poor hygiene gives them a natural body armor, because that thing didn't bleed. What it did do was rear up and make another noise at me, a low growl that my colon decided was a warning because it was producing bricks enough to construct a barricade. I worked the bolt and fired another shot, this time at its ugly, sloth-like bear-elephant face. This time it thwacked, and so did the dirt a dozen feet into the thing's left because it ricocheted off its skull. The gorp just stood there, staring at me, like it was too dumb to realize that it could have stood at the stream bed and grabbed me by the face when I pelted it with useless bullets and essentially crapping my pants out in the woods. I yelled at it, and I fired a third shot in any direction at all, just trying to scare it off. The gorp, or big bear sloth thing, whatever it was, dropped to all fours, lurched toward me once, then did a 360 and shuffled away. It worked. I stood there until the sky turned from blue to orange before I snapped out of it, and I tactically retreated back home. When I got back, I told my dad everything. I probably should have mentioned that it was him I was visiting for a few days. He could probably smell whatever it was on me, so there's no use lying to him. When I got to the part about what the big bears really were, he refused to believe me. Then he got mad. Then he locked all the doors and camped out upstairs for the rest of our visit. I had to bring him beer from downstairs when we wanted to shoot the shit. The weird thing is, as scared as he was, and as weirded out as I was at seeing my dad as spooked as a kid who's seen a skeleton, I wasn't scared. I remember that clearly. I wasn't scared. I guess you could say I was just too interested to be scared. If I was, I would have just bolted, and I probably wouldn't be typing this right now. But if I had to guess, it was probably that Adderall that I had popped that kept me from switching into fight or flight. It later occurred to me, after talking to some people and some research, that it was most likely indeed a giant sloth. So, although I was convinced for the longest time that I had seen some kind of Native American spirit monster or an escaped government project or one of those other things that people always talk about, but there are definitely giant ground sloths still living in the Ozarks. I'm gonna call my dad. So, what'd you think of those stories? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have a story of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. Down in the description as well is a PayPal and a Patreon if you'd like to donate to the channel, as well as some other details. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.